Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Reuters event webinar, Think Big, Start Small, Create Your Insurance Transformation Roadmap. It's once again a pleasure to be here with all of you. For those of you who don't know me, I am Christopher Franklin, founder of InsurTech 360 and InsurTech Innovators, and also Chief Innovation Officer with CareBridge International. I feel very fortunate today to be speaking with such a terrific group of innovators who will be sharing their thoughts around a number of topics very close to my heart: building your innovation roadmap, developing a strategy around build versus buy, how to prioritize innovation objectives, and how can you measure innovation. So before we get started, I would like to make a quick reminder. If you have any questions along the way, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So please put your questions through the Q&A method. So I'd like to give a very warm welcome to everybody here. Brent Hammer, AVP Innovation Officer with Grange Insurance. Beti, Cung, Head of Innovation Labs with CSAA. Karthikeyan, Rathinasabapathi, Director of Transformations, CUNA Mutual. Sean Adams, SVP Innovation Design, State Compensation Insurance Fund. And finally, Samir Ahmed, Principal and Head of Insurance with XBuy 2. So welcome to all of you. It's a great panel. We have a terrific topic to be talking about. And so we're going to be kind of walking through everybody, giving you the opportunity to speak and provide your comments. So let's get started. So Brent, I'd love to hand over to you and let you kind of talk a little bit about what's passionate in your space, perhaps build versus buy versus low code development. It'd be great to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Chris, well, thank you for the opportunity. It's great to be here. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about. And maybe just a little background on myself. As you said, Chris, I'm the Innovation Officer for Grange Insurance. We're a property and casualty carrier, really focused on the Midwest. And we started our innovation journey, our innovation roadmap at Grange, really in 2016. And one of the things that I think is really foundational at any stage of your innovation journey is really sort of establishing that buy versus build framework, getting that calibration across the different areas of the business that are driving different elements of how you're transforming the business. Change in the industry, I would say, is approaching what I would call ludicrous speed. There's an inside joke there that you might get. And we like to say at Grange, things have never moved as fast as they're moving right now, but they'll also never be this slow again. And so again, having that buy versus build framework is really critical to be able to manage the pace of change. So, I would say at Grange in particular, when we started our dedicated innovation team, that really accelerated the need, put the focus on where there were dissimilarities between the other agents of change within in the enterprise. So as an example, we have a digital team. They're firmly established. We've got a business intelligence and analytics team that again was well established. We even have an emerging tech subdivision of our IT department. And then innovation is really the newest of the members in terms of our agents of change and transformation for the enterprise. And I found out really quickly, everyone sort of had different definitions of what Horizon 1 versus 2 versus 3 are. And everyone kind of approached the buy versus build decision paradigm a little bit differently. And I would say the other thing, when you in an organization, when you have these different areas that are really tasked with transforming the business, you're inherently going to get people who are very, very inquisitive, and you're inherently going to get creators, as I would call them. And the thing about creators is that they like to create. That's how they sort of feel like they're adding value to the organization. And that tends to push towards a build type mentality. The catch to that is that creators often don't necessarily like to market their creations, right? Drive that adoption. And they don't necessarily like to maintain them over time, adding to that growing run rate of things that you've got to maintain in the business. And so I guess I would summarize in terms of best practices as you're, again, either starting out or maybe you're already established on your innovation journey. But I don't think a best practice in transformation, so to speak, is really a focus on ROI or a focus on speed specifically. How urgently do I need this? ROI in this space is fraught with assumptions that can be manipulated. It's really hard to put a pin on those types of things. And so I would submit that when you think about buy versus build, and as it relates to specifically business transformation initiatives, think about and do a real honest assessment of what skills do you have in-house. Are your people capable of seeing the forest through the trees? Can they see where the puck is going, or is transformation to them much more tactical and incremental in nature? You know, a quick example I guess I'll give is, you know, early on in my career, I was talking to a project manager, and they said that they were very proud that they never had a single project fail in 10 years. They really prided themselves on their resiliency and their ability to, you know, fit things in and wrestle them on the ground. And I heard that a different way. I heard that as saying, I'm really good at forcing square pegs into round holes. I'm really good at pushing things forward that maybe should have just failed fast or died on the vine. And that's where, again, bringing that outside perspective in, that buy mentality can really be helpful. So number one, just sort of assess, honestly, do we have the skills in-house to build this, but also maintain it, market it, promote it? And then, you know, the second thing and the most important thing is, if you're making a buy versus build decision, is it a differentiator for your company? Who are you? What do you compete on? What do your customers know you for, and what do you pride yourself on? And if it's something that really plays to your strengths and to your weaknesses, that's inherently going to be a little bit more proprietary in nature, leaning towards, again, the build side of things, and really establishing, you know, all the different solutions in the marketplace. But the very last thing before I turn it back over to you, Chris, is I think it's also important to understand that innovation occurs on a spectrum. Innovation is not linear. It's not sequential. We've got folks who are working on Horizon 2 things, Horizon 3 things, and then Horizon 1 things. Continuous improvement is part of this as well. So just having that understanding that it all happens on a horizon, and really being honest with how you want to differentiate yourself when you decide if you're going to build it internally or seek external InsurTech partners or vendors. So Chris, I'll turn it back over to you.
Cheers, Brent. That was awesome, and I love the reference that you threw in there. We'll open that if people want to guess what that was from. You win a special prize. No, I love the comments there, and you know, I think when you think about what low code can bring to the table in terms of agile development, you mentioned fail fast, which I think is something that companies are still learning to embrace. And you know, but we do have the tools now to enable innovation teams to build, create, fail fast, and learn, and kind of, you know, iterate through that process. So thanks, Brent. Awesome stuff. Beti, you are up next. I believe you'll be talking about some really innovative technology and some case studies around change management and chatbot integration. So over to you.
Thanks, Chris. So it's great to be here. So my name is Beti Cung, and I run a function at CSAA, who's a AAA insurer, called Innovation Labs. So my team is comprised primarily of technologists who are interested in sort of the, I wouldn't say bleeding edge, but the breaking edge of technology. Where we have quite a number of data scientists on the team, as well as folks, you know, focused on software in the cloud, mobile experiences, and some folks who are sort of pushing the envelope around computer vision or augmented realities. So I was asked to kind of focus more on change management for this particular segment. And just, you know, to lay it out there, I'm not a change management expert. I've spent most of my career in high tech, and several years, if not more than several years, on 2 different startups. So for me, innovation and change is a necessity. It's inevitable. And so it's interesting to kind of sort of look into and read about what change management is. We actually have a group within CSAA who focuses around change management. So I don't have to do the heavy lifting, but it was interesting to start to read through, you know, the practice of it. And I'll share something with you that I learned recently just by reading through the literature. If folks know, change management actually starts as a sort of a practice in the 60s, and it has its roots in grief consultation, which I thought was super interesting because I never thought of innovation and technology as something that would bring grief. And what was interesting to me also was that grief consultation or counseling is also focused very much on the human sense of loss. So not really a topic that seems like it would, you know, play into a group of people focused around emerging technologies. But as, you know, all the change that's happened in the world after the pandemic, and I'll say after the pandemic, hopefully, it actually starts making a lot of sense, right? Change can create an enormous sense of loss for a lot of people. And if we don't address that, then change can't be stable and it can't continue to progress. So one of the things that I'm not good at sort of different acronyms. And if you go through these different practices, you know, I spent last night reading about ADCAR and other things. I'll let you guys read that yourselves. But I like to kind of simplify things down to sort of something that's easy to understand for my organization or for my team. So the one that I like the best is sort of a pitcher-catcher model that basically says if you put a piece of change down, you throw a ball, there has to be someone at the other end to catch it. And the person has to want to catch it, right? They have to actually be a willing team member. And so when we look at change management and introducing new technologies, I actually do consciously do that on my team, where we do a series of things. So we have something called development rotation in our company that lets us cycle different people through our teams for short durations of time, working on projects within our labs. And we actually use that kind of strategically to create a catcher on the business side of the function, right? So one of the examples I was asked to share was the introduction and rollout of our chatbot powered functionality. So it's AI powered chatbot. And initially the organization was open to doing it, but very hesitant about rolling it out in sort of a whole way. So we were asked to kind of pick small pilots and roll it out very, very carefully and slowly. Part of the reason is that our organization is very customer centric. And the idea of having your customer sort of interacting with essentially an AI bot, there were a lot of folks worried about, you know, whether NPS would go down, whether customers would feel frustrated, you know, what kind of questions would get asked, you know, would there be sort of a detraction in overall customer experience? And those are very obvious worries, and I think they're crucial, right? This is an organization that prides itself on being customer first, customer forward. And so we took it slow and was testing and measuring, you know, limiting what the bot was able to respond to and very quickly handing off to a live agent. And what the pandemic did, which was kind of fascinating for us, but was overnight, we had an incredible amount of pressure from the service organization to go ahead and roll it out because they were getting swamped. And there were so many questions kind of coming in from customers that in order to actually give better service, we did need to roll out the bot. So that's sort of the second piece. So catcher pitcher model. But the second piece is how we talk about the change, right? So a lot of people talk about, the robots replacing us. When in actuality, if you're a practitioner of it, we're a long way away. I mean, we've made amazing progress, but it's a ways away. And I think there's very little, for me, interest in replacing people. The human in the loop is really interesting. I would say it's about augmentation versus replacement. And so that's something that we need to sort of message better. And I guess the other piece, the last piece, when you say change is inevitable, the messaging should also be around the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? The humanity of it. And I'm happy to see sort of management and the world talking a lot more about empathy to keep that human in the loop. I think technology serves us. They don't hopefully become our robot overlord. So I'll hand it back to Chris because I see he's popped up.
Beti, thank you so much. Lots of really interesting comments there. I think your mention of change management and how that relates to kind of grief consultation is really interesting. And I think anybody who has gone through significant change within an organization, sometimes it's changing practices that have gone on for years, right? If not decades for some people. So I think, from a cultural point of view, there's a lot that needs to be addressed before perhaps embarking on an innovation roadmap and trying to figure out how do we bring people along on that journey in a way that's empathetic and compassionate to their feelings and so forth. So brilliant. Thank you so much for those comments. That's excellent. If anybody has questions at this point, please put them through the Q&A tool. And moving swiftly on, Karthikeyan, welcome. Great to see you. I think you'll be talking a little bit about objectives when it comes to big transformations and how to approach that. So over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, our sponsors, X2, Thomson Reuters, for hosting this event. I'm Karthikeyan, and I work for CUNA Mutual Group. It's a great company to work for. I lead the transformation initiatives. Before joining CUNA Mutual, I used to work for Tata Consultancy Services and work with some of the big names like ING, Allianz, Aviva, team across both US and Europe. Today, I'm specifically asked by our legal department to state this. I'm going to say this, right? So I am representing my personal views only, and this is not my company's position by any means. Going into the topic, it's a great topic. I really like the whole concept around think big and start small. How does it apply to insurance companies, right? Most of the insurance companies are a few decades old. All of them are transforming at a different pace using different frameworks. Like Brent talked about the horizon 1, 2, 3. Some have short, mid, long term. Some call it blue ocean, red ocean, right? Different frameworks to approach the transformation and the innovation, right? If you look at most companies, especially when it comes to the long-term transformation, the horizon 3 type of a transformation, they tend a lot to partner with the insurtechs and fintechs, make investment in insurtech or fintech. This is where experts like Chris come into picture, right? In few cases, they also start up a separate entity and give them a complete freedom to go and innovate, right? Usually these teams are small, agile teams. They don't follow any of the standard processes. They are free to leverage any technology, any methodology. In summary, they become super good at innovating, and it works well for the companies as well. But when we look at the whole mothership, right? Some of the short-term and the mid-term transformations and how you want to steer them, right? It becomes super crucial to look at the big picture, but have to start small, right? So in this process, you need to start looking at what are the long poles in your tent, right? How do you approach these transformations? So as I have been through few transformations, worked with different insurers in different geographies, I wanted to draw attention towards strengthening muscles, right? To me, the data, technology, process transformation that we generally do with the mothership are much easier to approach, right? But there are certain transformation which I want to treat them more like my abdomen muscle. At least for me, it's one of the hardest muscle to strengthen, right? And it is one of the ones that gets weakened quite quickly, right? So when I look at these transformations that I have been part of, and I look at what are those abdomen muscles, which are the ones which are really hard to strengthen, and two things comes to my mind. One, the people transformation or culture transformation, you can call it, right? And the second is the operating model and the methodologies. So I want to talk about these two, data and technology and other innovations that are great, but I want to focus on these abdomen muscles for today, right? When we talk about cultural transformation, right? First, I would look at the leadership. How do we transform the leaders of this decade-old insurance companies to be truly servant leaders? Are they empowering their teams? How good are they at decision making, right? Because I have seen some companies pivot too often, especially when a new leader comes, he wants to change everything, right? Some companies keep investing on bad ideas till the heads roll, right? Where are you? Where is your company? Where are your leaders? What transformation you want to do there, right? And then look at the culture of your team, right? How are you encouraging your teams to innovate? How are you encouraging your teams to take a risk, right? And are you rewarding an individual or are you rewarding your teams? Is your teams collaborating enough or are they over collaborating and keep talking, right? And the other buzzword today in the industry is customer centricity, right? This can be over abused sometimes. But when it comes to customer centricity, what really means as a customer centricity to your company, and if you're a multi-line insurer, like to a specific line of products, right? And where do you want to be, right? These are some of the key questions that I would like to ask when it comes to people transformation, right? When we focus on the operating model or methodology, as Chris mentioned, we all have transformed a lot in terms of the agile methodology, how we run the ceremonies and events. But when it truly comes to agile mindset, right, a lot of companies have a really long way to go, right? Teams have been doing this waterfall for a long time, right? It is really a hard concept for them to change their mindset to start thinking about things slicing your work, delivering work incrementally, and getting this customer feedback, right? And these things take really long time to strengthen, right? What's your big vision for that? Like, how do you want to approach that, right? And the other couple of quick points I would mention is on the operating model, right? A lot of companies are still operating in a project mode, but many companies have moved from a project mode to a more long-standing capability teams called our product teams, right? So these setups takes time, right? What's your vision? How do you want to approach this, right? And even in terms of vendor strategy, right? We are insurance companies. We are not in the business of technology, so we need to rely on vendors like X5 for some of our needs, right? So how do you want to approach them? So these are some of the key questions that I would like to ask before you start exploring transformation, or if you're already in the midway. Treat them like your abdomen muscles, because these muscles are going to take a really long time to strengthen. So you need to think big, but start small and do your workout every day to get there. That's all I have to say for today. Thank you, Chris.
Karthikeyan, thank you. Very well done. You got a lot in there in a short amount of time, so love it. And I think I'm glad you mentioned the customer and customer centricity, right? Because I think sometimes if you don't have a good handle on what you're building and why you're building it, it's very difficult to have a innovation and technology strategy that fits the mold. So thanks again for your comments there. Sean, you are up next, and talking, I think, a little bit about data, data readiness, data management, obviously key ingredients to an innovation strategy. So over to you.
That's right. Yeah, thanks, Chris. So hi, everybody. I'm Sean Adams. I'm the head of innovation at California State Compensation Insurance Fund. So we're a state agency that handles workers' comp. So we're a mono-state, monoline agency, and California is not a monopolistic state, meaning some states have a state fund, and that's the only workers' comp insurance that you can purchase. But in California, it's a competitive market. So I was hired about 2 years ago, similar to Beti. Prior to that, my experience was all in tech firms, largely small startup type of tech firms, where people didn't have, you know, innovation or change management in their title because it's a matter of survival, right? So it's kind of like a shared service almost, and it's an expectation that everybody kind of has that mindset. So when I started the journey here at State Fund, change management in general was a big topic. And I think for anyone out there that is starting their digital transformation, if you're tasked with doing this, and maybe you're a little bit unsure of where to start, I would humbly recommend that you take a really hard look at change management as a whole. And so there's a whole bunch of different aspects to that. One of the big aspects that we have focused on is data readiness. So you talk about readiness in general, but data readiness is really important. As Brent mentioned, you know, a lot of times you get conflicting kind of, not necessarily priorities, but you have different groups that have different objectives, and maybe there's silos, maybe it's the wording used, but for whatever reason, you're not necessarily unified across that. So you kind of need that common language to be able to unify those efforts. And a lot of times, data is going to provide that, right? We're making, depending on who you talk to, we're either in the knowledge economy or have made a transition to a knowledge economy, which means, in my opinion, that, you know, the tools that we work with is data, bits of data. So conceptually, it's pretty easy. And my organization has been around for well over 100 years. So how are we utilizing data? And we quickly found that, you know, there's steps for readiness in terms of data preparation. And I would submit that the very first step is trying to get that unifying data layer in there so that all your data bits are all swimming in the same pool. They're bound by the same rules. It is surprising to me how many organizations have very disparate databases with very unique and single sources of data, but they're all spread out and there's no real interaction. And, you know, that's the real power that you can unlock with data. It's not in the individual data bits necessarily. Sometimes you get free stuff out of that. But where you're really going to unlock, you know, that acceleration and that wow, that aha, is novel ways of comparing data and processing data bits together so that you're getting novel answers or novel results out of that. So that first step is kind of that unifying data layer. Once you have that, you know, what are you going to do with it? How do you describe that? I think a good exercise is to go to a business user in your organization and ask them, you know, how simple would it be if you wanted to get a report for all the claims for people named Joe in September of 2019? Would you be able to do that? Well, probably yes, that's a relatively easy ask for most insurance companies, but you know, you start to do that thought exercise more and more, and you quickly get into situations where you can ask about combining different data sets that are impossible to combine. So the question that you ask is, you know, how easy is it for a business user to request a set of data or to request analysis on data and have that actually done? What is that communication line between the users and tech? And so a lot of times, you know, you may deal with a little bit of territorialism there, or potentially, you know, two different groups talking different languages. I like the analogy about exercising. It's a muscle, right? Karthikeyan mentioned that innovation in general, I think, is a muscle. And in that, I love analogies. In that analogy, data is the weights, right? So the more that you're interacting with data, the more that you're exercising with data sets, the stronger you're going to get. So that's kind of the foundational aspect. Without that, we've had engagements and we've had proof of concepts that we've had to walk away from simply because the data readiness on our side wasn't there. So you get the unifying layer. You talk about being accessible, right? Easily accessible. And then lastly is, you know, understanding the flow of data through the organization, such that we had an engagement with an AI vendor that looked promising, but we weren't able to really go forward with it because the set of data that they wanted to look at was a result of previous sets of data. And so what we found through our due diligence was that there were, the previous sets of data were suspect. So while the set that we were looking at, all things being equal, garbage in, garbage out, was pristine, right? It was operating on the data the way it was supposed to be operating on. The problem is we had to start this exercise of walking this data all the way back. If we would have had a unifying layer, if we would have had more accessible data, then maybe that process would have been a little bit less painful for us. So in the grand scheme of things, I think change management as a topic, we easily could talk for hours and hours on it, but data management is a huge thing for that.
Don, brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, as somebody who has spent a lot of time on the technology side of things. You know, it's seen so many times how RPA, intelligent automation, kind of an API strategy is so dependent upon having good data or having a solid data strategy. So I'm really delighted that you highlighted some of those needs. So thank you. So wrapping up for today, we have Samir, Ahmed. Samir will be talking about a few different things, organizational challenges, and yeah, kind of where innovation fits into an organization. So Samir, you're our last one for today. Just again, a quick reminder, any questions, put them through the Q&A and we'll get to those very shortly. Samir, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, hi everyone. I'm Samir Ahmed. I'm with X2. We're a technology consultancy focused on transformational initiatives in insurance and healthcare industries. I myself have been in technology consultancy for the better part of 2 decades and have grown up through the technical ranks. So being at a technology consultancy, I'm very excited to partner with Reuters to have this webinar and bring on our esteemed panelists to share our collective perspectives. I'll try to keep my remarks short so we can get to Q&A from the audience. But, you know, thinking of transformation, there's hardly an insurance organization that is not going through some sort of transformation. And reality is that actually this is not anything new. Transformation has been going on for many, many years. And it's just what flavor of transformation are we in? Just to kind of remind ourselves, right, there was a time when insurance management was all based off of paper files, and records management meant how do we handle these corridors of file cabinets with folders in them. And the introduction of microfiche technology did wonders for that. And then, you know, a company like Policy Management Systems Corporation came along and started the process of digitizing records. And this was, you know, based off of mainframe systems. And so we went from insurance management from being on paper files to computerized files. So that was probably the first wave of, you know, transformation. And then there was a move from mainframe to distributed systems, which happened in 2 waves. One was moving to client server type technology, which the critical element there was it moved the access to the systems from the back office to the front office. And then the second wave of that was going to web-based systems. And the critical piece there was that it moved the access from front office to the field force and a little bit in the hands of the policyholders. And today we're in sort of the next wave now, which is moving to cloud-based systems and leveraging machine learning for processing purposes. So, you know, my point is that transformation is not new. It's something that the industry has been going through for many, many years at various stages. And carriers have skipped some of these, right? They go from one, skip another to the next, so on. So the key thing here, right, is that when an organization goes through a transformational stage, it uses up a lion's share of the organizational resources. And this is over an extended period of time, right? 3 to 5 years would be fairly typical. So it creates this challenge that how do we continue transformation, but at the same time focus on innovation? And innovation typically, right, is around initiatives that have shorter duration, quicker turnaround. But if resources are focused on transformation, who do we get to focus on the innovation? Right, so that's a critical challenge I see carriers facing whenever they're in the throes of transformation. So one approach that you know might be helpful here is that you look at the footprint of transformation and the focus of transformation, it is typically inward focused, right? Focusing on reducing costs, gaining efficiencies, reducing processing time, so forth. And the demands of innovation are coming from customers, right? At no time before the past few years have customers been more vocal and more demanding of capabilities from carriers. So if instead of having transformation start with an inward focus, we have transformation that starts with the outward focus, meaning that how do we transform the customer's experience throughout their lifetime of interactions with the carrier? And then work backwards from that in terms of internally, what does that mean? What capabilities do we have to develop? What changes do we have to make? Be they people changes, process changes, technology changes, whatever it may be. And when carriers do that, some carriers have been doing this, it allows them to make changes that are small and incremental, and they deliver real value to the end customer. And that can become one measure of progress and success of your transformation. Somebody had commented earlier, right? And how do you measure the success of transformation? So if you give the customer some tangible capability, that becomes a very powerful measure of success. So anyhow, right, that's one thought I wanted to just share. The second thought I want to share, and I'll leave this as an open question, right? I think carriers need to sort of answer this fairly fundamental question. They're faced with this, question today, I believe. Do we want to be a insurance company that leverages technology, or do we want to be a technology company that happens to offer insurance? This fundamentally will change sort of the trajectory of the company, the focus of where resources are put, and ultimately what kind of outcomes you're desiring. Neither is good or bad. It really just is a matter of what the organization wants. So Chris, I think I'll stop here. That's what I wanted to share, and happy to take any questions.
Samir, thank you. That's another fascinating conversation there, right? And I think that again we've touched upon kind of the idea of the customer experience, what the customer is looking for, and I think certainly, Samir, you mentioned that transformation is not new, but I think we are seeing perhaps an acceleration in what customers expect to get from their insurance experience. And I really like the idea of working kind of back into the kind of culture and the company and the technology, identifying the customer needs and saying, okay, how do we deliver that? How do we get to this space where we can bring greater transparency to the customer experience and customer journey? So all good stuff. So let's start with your question, Samir. I think that's a great one. Is the industry kind of moving toward this where insurance companies will become much kind of greater, bigger users of technology, or are we seeing technology companies that will kind of start to offer insurance? And I think InsurTech is obviously introduced a lot of technology-centric companies to the industry, but is it a case of meeting in the middle? Brent, I'll let you kick off with that.
Yeah, Samir, that's a great question. And I really think it depends on ultimately, are you an incumbent in the industry, or are you a new entrant in the industry? Are you looking to just sort of maintain and grow gradually, or are you looking to disrupt? For carriers like Grange, we would say, we're an insurance company, but we're using technology to deliver a better insurance experience, a better insurance product. And that really, I would look at the mission of the company. At Grange, our mission is to provide peace of mind and protection to our policyholders. And so insurance is the mechanism to do that. But There's a company in Columbus, Ohio, right across the street called Root Insurance. And, I've had conversations with them. They say they're a technology company first. And so again, I think those companies that are attempting to disrupt the incumbents inherently will bend towards being tech focused.
Brilliant. Beti, any thoughts? You talked a lot about kind of some of the technology innovation, the chatbot integration and so forth. I mean, where do you see the future kind of heading in that respect?
It's kind of interesting if you look at this panel, and I think several people have said they actually come from tech, right? And not so much from sort of a traditional insurance background. And I think that's very telling of where the industry is heading. The folks at Andreessen are famous to say software is eating the world, I think is the phrase. And I think what that means essentially is that, technology will be driving much of our business decisions. My team is probably more than half comprised of data scientists. And the idea there is that AI and machine learning models and algorithms will help us decide at each step of the way in any of our work streams what to do, right? And we reserve just the most complex sort of human-to-human interactions for our agents or to make decision, right? But the simplistic ones, we're going to let a software make the decision. So I think it's pretty clear in that sense where the industry is heading, and we've seen this disruption or transformation happening in a number of industries. Just borrowing from something Brent said, right? In terms of Root and how they see themselves as a technology company. The other company that says they're a technology company, not a transportation company, right, is Uber or Lyft. And see, how quickly that's grown, right? So I think the signs are clear in that sense.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I think I feel like it's almost like a meeting in the middle, right? Where it's kind of the technology firms. Insurance is still a very people-centric industry that requires compassion and empathy at certain points in the journey. Claims, for example, and I think a tech-first approach is absolutely viable, but depending on the type of claim, depending on the complexity and the emotion involved, where do you bring people into that equation? Sean, any thoughts from your end?
I think the panelists have summed it up pretty well. I think I agree. It is going that direction, and the change is inevitable. So I also think that we're seeing interesting trends in terms of demographics and the customers that we serve. And in my opinion, from the research I've seen, we're seeing very stark differences in what we might think of as acceptable, or what our customers might think of as acceptable, between the younger generations and maybe the older generations. And there's exceptions, right? I don't mean to generalize like that, but the numbers say that, generally speaking, younger folks are a lot more willing to interact with kind of the bots and the AI personalities because they view the trade-off as accessibility. So they're willing to put up with that if it means that when they have insomnia at 3 a.m., they can log in and make changes to whatever account they have. Furthermore, they seem to be a little bit more willing to risk their personal information and not necessarily mind as much, if their information is going off to the cloud and there's a breach. I think breaches are becoming a little bit more, unfortunately, of a fact of life for everyone. Mm-hmm. And so us in insurance, we're obviously very risk averse. I think in terms of the march of technology, based off of my experience in previous tech industries versus insurance, is this risk aversion that's preventing us from moving forward, because there's kind of this internal conflict of, wait a second, we're an insurance company, we're supposed to manage risk, but these solutions that we're kind of being forced into are essentially asking us to become much more risky. So it's a really interesting dynamic that, at least in my organization, has been played out. I think once that gets settled, if it ever gets settled, then the path through technology becomes a little bit clearer.
Yeah, totally agree. And your comment about data and how it's used, it's actually, we had a question about from Shailesh about dark data, companies who are collecting, and obviously, you know, I think through OCR, NLP, IoT, you know, lots of the acronyms, right? But we're seeing a lot more data being collected and consumed, and perhaps, you know, for now, only a small portion of it actually being used intelligently to drive kind of the insurance experience. Where do you all see kind of rich data perhaps being used going forwards to make more informed decisions? Karthikeyan, I don't know if you have any thoughts around that.
I think sure, Chris. I want to quickly go back to the last question and add a quick comment there, right? I totally agree with all the comments by Beti, Brent, and Sean on that. And one more point to add, depending upon whether you are a B2C, a direct-to-consumer business, or you are a B2B type of an insurer, right? There are insurance companies which are also exploring how they could offer technology as a solution to some of their B2B partners, right? Using their partnership and offering that technology as a solution. To summarize this view, right? Like, the insurance companies are not traditional insurance companies anymore. They start to leverage more of their technology, not just for themselves, but for their partners, and to make it as another source of revenue, right? To answer your second question, right? Like, data is super rich, right? You could do multiple things with the data, but what is more importantly, especially some of the companies are asking, is what is the ethical boundary, right? Where do you want to play and use your data? And there are new roles being created, right? A chief ethical officer, especially to oversee how the data is being used. So it is not necessarily about how you can use, right? It is more about how ethical do you want to be as a company, and how you want to leverage is what I'm seeing, Chris.
Thank you, Karthikeyan. Samir, I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of the idea of, you know, the question of data. And I know you guys obviously work very heavily in the insurance space, but also in the healthcare space, right? So where, you know, you're starting to see perhaps in some cases this convergence of verticals and perhaps data that might start to transition between different verticals. Where do you see this question of data going as we start to kind of think about wearables? You know, lots of different sources of data, but how do we use it intelligently?
Yeah, so you know, I wish I could tell you that we figured it out. It remains sort of an ongoing effort to leverage the data. So I think it's important to kind of keep a few things in perspective. I guess, you know, I'm a technologist, so I kind of think in boxes. You know, you can get the greatest systems in place, but ultimately what connects them is the data running through them, right? So I think that's where Sean's comments earlier, right, are very on point, that your data must be in good order for a transformation to have any degree of success. Now, in terms of leveraging data, right, so just like with systems, right, there's this gradual move of access to systems. Used to be in the back office, moved to front office, moved to the field, and now it's in the hands of policyholders. So same thing is happening with data. That access used to be limited to folks in the back office, then it moved into some, let's say, analytics or informatics group, and now end users in organizations are demanding and starved for, you know, access to this data. So really that's the sort of problem to focus on. And eventually, right, this will move into the hands of the consumers, where today in insurance, it's not there so much. In other sectors, you see that people asking, hey, give me my data, I want it, and I'm going to move somewhere else. So in some small measures, it happens in group insurance context where customers ask for their claims experience, right? So, this is coming. We haven't faced it in a big way, but it's coming. In terms of the crossover between verticals, we see a lot of it in life and health. So, for example, you know, moving to electronic health records in the health space has been a big effort, at least in the United States, over the past decade. And now life insurance companies are wanting to tap into that for purposes of underwriting. And I think there's a lot more opportunity there in terms of going beyond just underwriting, but how do you offer discounts for having good health and being able to measure that good health over extended periods of time, so forth. In the property casualty space, I personally have not seen it too much. The place where we see it a little bit is where medical claims are, involved. So work comp or bodily injury type claims.
Yeah,
Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, Sean, I would kind of come back to you, circle back to you a little bit on the idea of, just the concept of it's not just collecting data, it's kind of the data readiness part, but it's also, asking the question why, what are we doing with the data? What questions are we answering? What kind of insight are we providing? And obviously in the workers' comp space, I mean, at CareBridge, we did a lot with kind of medical reserves and estimates around that using data intelligently. And, I'm sure you see a similar kind of approach in your space, but any additional thoughts you'd like to add there?
No, what you said is on point, exactly. And I think it's interesting, Samir's point about, the bridge is that there's a lot of insurance, healthcare have a lot of reasons to exchange data. And it's not just related to that. So then now, it's this ever increasing scope. So you handle the data within an organization or like Samir said, right? Initially, it's the technical folks that handle the data. Now you expand it. Now you give access to the business folks, and now you expand it. Now maybe you're giving access to your policyholders. It's not as opaque. That's a big complaint about insurance in general, but specifically workers' comp, is that I have no idea what changes would affect my policy and how, right? So that's kind of exposing that. And then the next step, the big trend that's coming, the big thing that I think is coming is this whole ecosystem model. And now how do we facilitate the exchange of data across disparate organizations, and how do we manage that? And that's a really fascinating conversation, I think, that everyone is heading towards.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, Sean, that's a great point. I would just add very quickly too, it's interesting when I think about incumbents and new entrants in terms of carriers to the industry. And I would argue that the vast majority of incumbents have a mountain of data, incredibly valuable data, but really struggle with how they harness it, how they structure it. And then on the flip side, the new entrants who are born digital, they don't have data that they have to mine on mainframe systems. They're born digital, and so they're also collecting way more data points than maybe an incumbent carriers, which is interesting. But they don't have that depth of data, that historic experience to apply it. And so where Sean's comment really, I think, resonates with me is the incumbent carriers are looking for those networks. They're looking for those insurtech enablers to help them mine and structure just the mountains of data they have, but then also augment it with new and novel data sources.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Beti, any comments, kind of within the innovation lab space that you're in? And I know you mentioned, half of your team are data scientists. So obviously you are looking at data and kind of figuring out how to use it intelligently. I mean, how much of your effort goes into understanding data and kind of prepping data?
So the last question first, which is how much effort are we doing prepping data? And Sean's comments, prescient comments earlier about, your data has to be in good order. My team probably spends probably a good 70–80% in data wrangling. That's sort of the word they use. And that is just taking the raw data and putting it into a usable format before any modeling, any of the sort of cool whiz-bang stuff happens at all.
Yeah.
So that's why earlier when, people are, on the bleeding edge saying, AI bots are going to simulate humans. It's far from that, right? We're still doing a lot of sort of data transformation and extraction work. And just the ELT piece of it is still taking up most of the team's time. So that's the last half of your question. I guess the other part that I kind of wanted to touch on that Brent and Sean both talked about was the ecosystem piece. That is really interesting. Just as I was sitting here, I got an email ad from Hippo and ADT offering me, free smoke detector and water sensors in order to sign up for Hippo, who's obviously an insurtech, right, for 25% off my homeowners. So that kind of thing is happening. And so it's fascinating. It's joining IoT sensor data with sort of marketing efforts around lead gen and reaching a consumer who now, you know, stops and thinks about it and says, well, I guess I don't mind having, you know, a water sensor data sent somewhere else up into the cloud. That's okay. That's not my social security number, right? And so Sean touched on so many interesting things. So thank you, Sean. The other piece that he touched on that I really thought about and loved was about this interesting dynamic for insurance companies forced to transform and forced to become digital and forced to innovate and take risks. And that's really fascinating because coming from tech, there was this trend, right, that Facebook started that was about move fast and break everything, right, sort of hack. And what we're seeing now is, wow, you can really break a lot of really important things, right? And so in insurance, I kind of like that very obvious balance that we all have, right? That we want to move fast, we want to think big, but we can't afford to break this. So it's given me a new appreciation for that kind of steady and thoughtful and to a certain extent, risk-aware approach to technology.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I think that captures it well, Beti. Thank you. So we have about 5 minutes left. Well, one great question to finish with. I think you can take about a minute each. From Saitandra, it's a good one, right? It's the classic. How do each of your teams, companies define innovation and transformation? I'm also going to throw in there, how do you measure it? Just for fun. So Samir, maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah, so I think I sort of shared my perspective on this in my remarks, and so I'll just go back to that and let others comment that. To me, I think the best measure of innovation and success is capabilities that customers have and how satisfied are customers with the services that the carrier is offering them. And ultimately, right, I think we got to remember that customers are coming to carriers not for technology, not for experience, but ultimately they're coming for protection. And the fundamentals of risk management, they need to remain strong no matter what we do. So that also is a measure of success that we need to keep in mind.
Fantastic, thanks. Brent.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess real quickly, what I would say, again, for my opening comments is that innovation is really viewed on a spectrum. And so if I'm thinking about an axis, you sort of have the inside driven innovation on one and the outside on the other. And then on the other axis, you really have, is it incremental continuous improvement, or is it over here and is it more blue sky, potential exponential? And I think you plot each of your groups, each of your business transformation groups in your enterprise in different spaces in that grid. And for our group, for the innovation group, it's really dealing with insurtechs. And so we'd kind of be in that quadrant that leans towards more outside in perspective and also leans towards more exponential blue sky rather than the incremental sort of process improvement work.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brent. Sean?
Yeah, similar to Brent, my team is basically, our function is to go find external solutions. So that's largely how we're measured. But from a philosophical point of view, I think it's about impact, right? We're all here to make impact. We're all change agents. So I personally think that impact is a very personalized thing. I don't think there's a one size fits all, just like Agile. You don't take any Agile implementation straight out of the book and just without thought implement it into the organization. So some corporate innovation groups, back to the build versus buy, some corporate innovation groups are maybe really, really good at going out and scouting technology and then bringing it back to their developers and saying, this is what you guys need to build. And that's what they should be measured on. Other teams, like probably mine and Brent's, are measured on our ability to bring that technology in-house. So it's really, you should sit down and think with your leadership. And I'm lucky, I think maybe some of the panelists on here are lucky as well, that our leadership gets it and are able to give us a little bit of freedom to move around the country, so to speak.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Karthikeyan, any last minute thoughts?
Sure. So we don't attempted to define what is innovation versus a transformation, right? Like, but we do have this concept of Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3. Like each of these entities operate slightly differently, right? If it is a Horizon 1, we ask questions like, what do you really want to be good at? Are you focusing on the product innovation? Are you focusing on the customer centricity? Are you focusing on the operational efficiency, right? So depending upon that, we may incline towards a transformation, incremental, or more disruptive transformation based on the need. But the Horizon 3 focuses primarily on innovation, leveraging different innovation framework, and more or less that's more or less like our blue ocean strategy for us, right? That's how we approach innovation versus transformation.
Karthikeyan, thank you. Beti, we have about 30 seconds, I think.
Okay, I'll try to be quick, but I'm long-winded. So I would agree with Karthik. We use sort of that McKinsey model of Horizon 1, 2, and 3. So sort of the incremental, the adjacent, and then the disruptive. But I think it's actually pretty tricky to measure. So the closer in, so closer to the core of a business, then the measurements are sort of the KPIs that the business uses, right? But the disruptive ones are like, you know, potentially 3 to 7 years out. And so for there, I think that's where sort of the impact piece matters. I like to use a framework that is similar to sort of what we use for, you know, reviews, but it's around influence, impact, and reach. So influence is also a really important measurement, because this is the change management piece, right? How many people can you talk to and convince and bring along with you? The impact, which is essentially, are you doing something important or something somewhat trivial, right? And then the reach is, how big is this going to get? And I think the reach is the one that's further out, and that's for the Horizon 3. And then the first two you can use to kind of measure your efforts as you go along. So hopefully that helps.
Great way to finish. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to everybody listening. To Reuters Events, to XBY2 for sponsoring. Thanks to all of you. Very quick reminder, Future of Insurance 2021, June the 22nd to the 24th. Get registered for that. And cheers, everybody. Great to see you all, and all the best. See you soon.
Thank you.
Take care.